Hey there, it's Karenology. This level of audacity is off the charts. You have to hear this.
The first time I saw Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the homeowner association, she was standing on the edge of my dad's property, hands on her hips, inspecting the lakeside cabin like she already owned it. My dad had passed away 3 months ago, and I had barely begun sorting through his belongings when this woman appeared out of nowhere. She claimed she was just here to ensure everything was up to code, but her tone carried the same authority as a warden inspecting a prisoner's cell. The cabin, nestled at the edge of Lake Sparrow, had been in our family for generations. My dad loved this place more than anything. It was his sanctuary, a retreat from the city's chaos. Now it seemed Karen and the homeowner association had set their sights on it. "This dock here," Karen said, tapping her manicured nail on the weathered wood, "it's technically encroaching on the common lake space. It'll have to go." I clenched my fist. That dock has been here for 40 years. It's grandfathered in. Karen's smirk widened. "The association has updated rules. You'll find them in this packet." She shoved a thick folder into my hands filled with dense legalese that made my head spin. "And while we're at it, the cabin's siding doesn't meet aesthetic guidelines. You'll need to repaint it, neutral tones only." I didn't bother responding. Instead, I turned and walked back to the cabin, slamming the door behind me. But Karen wasn't done. Over the next few days, she showed up with increasing demands: fixing the gravel driveway, removing excessive shrubbery, and paying fines for late association dues my dad supposedly owed. It was a relentless barrage, each demand more absurd than the last. Then came the letter. Delivered by certified mail, it accused me of illegally occupying common property. The cabin, Karen claimed, was built partially on land that belonged to the homeowner association. I laughed at the audacity of it until I realized they were serious. Attached to the letter was a notice of an upcoming meeting to discuss the issue, with Karen listed as the chair. At the meeting, Karen's theatrics were in full display. She presented maps, poorly doctored, as I would later prove, showing the cabin encroaching on association land. A few neighbors nodded along, either too intimidated or too indifferent to challenge her. "We're not trying to take anything," Karen cooed, her voice dripping with insincerity. "We just want to resolve this matter amicably." "By taking my property," I shot back, my voice rising. "This cabin is on my family's deed. It's been here longer than any of you." Karen's smile tightened. "The association has rights too. If you're unwilling to cooperate, we may have to escalate this legally." After the meeting, one of the neighbors, an older man named Tom, approached me. "Watch your back," he said in a low voice. "Karen doesn't play fair. She's got the city in her pocket. Permits, inspectors, you name it." Tom handed me a folder filled with documents. "These are meeting minutes from the last few years. You'll see a pattern. Karen pushes people out, takes their property, and then it ends up developed by her contractor buddies." It all started to make sense. Karen wasn't just harassing me, she was orchestrating a land grab. I decided it was time to fight back. The next morning, I woke up to find my dock torn apart. Planks were scattered across the water, nails sticking out like jagged teeth. A note was pinned to what remained of the railing: "Unauthorized structure removed per homeowner association guidelines." Furious, I called the sheriff, but as expected, the deputy who arrived seemed more interested in Karen's version of events. "This is a civil matter," he said, shrugging. "Take it up with the association." That's when I knew I couldn't rely on the authorities. If I wanted to keep my dad's legacy intact, I'd have to expose Karen and her cronies for the frauds they were. Tom and I began digging. We found financial records that linked Karen to a construction firm notorious for shady deals. She'd been funneling homeowner association funds into beautification projects that conveniently benefited her allies. But the most damning evidence was a forged survey, supposedly proving the cabin's encroachment. The original survey, buried in city archives, told a different story. The cabin sat squarely within its rightful boundaries. Before we could act, Karen made her next move. She filed a lawsuit demanding that the cabin be demolished. The court date was set, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. If she won, I'd lose everything. But I had an ace up my sleeve. The sheriff, despite his earlier indifference, had taken an interest in the case after hearing whispers about Karen's methods. He offered to investigate the financial irregularities we'd uncovered. It was a long shot, but it gave me hope. The night before the court hearing, my fence was vandalized. Karen's tactics were escalating, and it was clear she was desperate. but desperation made her sloppy. She left behind a trail, emails, payments, and connections that tied her directly to the contractor's underhanded dealings. As I prepared my case, I realized this wasn't just about saving a cabin. It was about standing up to corruption, exposing the greed that had infected our community, and honoring my father's memory. The next morning, I walked into that courtroom ready for battle. The courtroom felt like a battleground. Karen strutted in, armed with her forged documents and a smug expression, while I clutched the folder of evidence that Tom and I had painstakingly gathered. The judge's gavel struck, calling the session to order, and the air grew thick with tension. Karen's lawyer began with a polished argument, painting me as an uncooperative landowner who refused to follow the rules. They presented doctored maps, false claims about the cabin's boundaries, and exaggerated homeowner association guidelines. Karen nodded along, her expression one of feigned concern. But when my turn came, her confidence began to waver. I laid out the original survey, highlighting the discrepancies in Karen's version. The judge frowned, clearly unimpressed with the inconsistencies. Then I presented financial records, connecting Karen to the shady contractor and revealing how homeowner association funds were being funneled into private deals. Karen's face reddened as whispers rippled through the courtroom. Just as I thought the tide was turning, Karen pulled her trump card. She claimed that my late father had verbally agreed to relinquish the disputed land to the association, a bold-faced lie. Her lawyer produced a signed statement from a supposed witness, but the handwriting was suspiciously familiar. I argued against its authenticity, but the judge decided to adjourn, leaving the matter unresolved. Karen shot me a victorious glance as she left. That night, I returned to the cabin to find it vandalized again. The windows were shattered, the mailbox ripped from its post, and graffiti scrawled across the front door, reading, "Comply or else." My blood boiled, but I refused to let Karen intimidate me. I filed a police report, though I knew it wouldn't lead anywhere. Karen's reach extended far beyond the homeowner association. The next morning, Tom called with news. He had uncovered more dirt on Karen, including emails between her and city officials discussing a redevelopment plan that centered on acquiring my property. It was clear this wasn't just a power play. It was a coordinated effort to force me out and hand the land over to Karen's allies. I decided to take the fight public. With Tom's help, I organized a community meeting at the local library. Flyers were distributed, and whispers of Karen's corruption spread like wildfire. By the time the meeting began, the room was packed with neighbors, many of whom had their own grievances against the homeowner association. The meeting started with tense silence as I laid out my case. I showed the financial records, the original survey, and testimonies from other neighbors who had been bullied by Karen. The room erupted into murmurs of outrage. Several people stood up, sharing their stories of unfair fines, fabricated violations, and sudden property seizures. Karen had made more enemies than she realized. Just as I felt momentum building, Karen stormed into the room with her lawyer in tow. "This is slander," she barked, her voice shaking with anger. "You have no proof of wrongdoing." I calmly held up the latest piece of evidence Tom had found, a recording of Karen admitting to using homeowner association funds for personal gain. The room fell silent as her voice echoed through the speakers. Karen's lawyer tried to object, but the damage was done. The community turned on her, demanding her resignation and a full investigation. Karen's fury reached a boiling point. She began targeting my allies, including Tom, by spreading rumors and issuing baseless fines. Tom's mailbox was also vandalized, and he received a letter threatening legal action if he continued supporting me. It was clear Karen was spiraling, but her desperation only strengthened my resolve. The sheriff, now fully involved, uncovered even more damning evidence against Karen. Her contractor ally was implicated in several other schemes, and financial audits revealed widespread embezzlement within the homeowner association. Karen's empire was crumbling, but she refused to go down without a fight. One night, I awoke to the sound of footsteps outside the cabin. Grabbing a flashlight, I stepped onto the porch to find a shadowy figure fleeing into the woods. They had left a note pinned to the door. "Drop the case or regret it." My hands trembled, but I knew backing down wasn't an option. This was no longer just about the cabin. It was about standing up to corruption and protecting what my family had built. The next court hearing was fast approaching, and this time I was ready. Karen's lies were unraveling, her allies were turning against her, and the community had rallied behind me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she had one last trick up her sleeve. The days leading up to the court hearing were a whirlwind of preparation. Tom and I worked tirelessly, compiling every shred of evidence we had against Karen and her allies. The sheriff's investigation added weight to our case, uncovering even more connections between Karen and the corrupt contractor. Still, the threats continued. Another note was slipped under my door one evening. Walk away, or you'll lose more than just the cabin. Instead of fear, the threat ignited a fire within me. I had come too far to back down now. The community was watching, and many of them had joined my cause, eager to see Karen dethroned. The day of the hearing arrived, and the courtroom was packed, not just with lawyers and officials, but with neighbors who had grown tired of Karen's reign. Karen's lawyer opened with a dramatic speech, accusing me of staging a campaign to defame the homeowner association. They waved the signed statement from the supposed witness, claiming it was proof that my father had agreed to cede part of the property. But their confidence began to crumble when I presented the original survey and the sheriff's findings. The judge scrutinized the documents, his expression growing darker by the moment. Karen's lawyer attempted to dismiss the evidence as circumstantial, but the sheriff's testimony was irrefutable. He detailed Karen's financial misconduct, her ties to the contractor, and the falsification of official records. The tension in the room was palpable, and Karen's mask of composure began to slip. When it was Karen's turn to speak, she launched into a tirade, accusing me of manipulating the community and violating association rules. Her voice rose to a shrill pitch as she denied every allegation, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. The judge finally interrupted, demanding order in the courtroom. As the proceedings continued, several neighbors stepped forward to testify. They shared their own experiences with Karen's heavy-handed tactics, exorbitant fines, fabricated violations, and threats to their property. One elderly couple tearfully recounted how they had been forced to sell their home after Karen's contractor sabotaged their foundation under the guise of repairs. Their stories painted a damning picture of Karen's abuse of power. Karen's lawyer tried to discredit the testimonies, but the judge had heard enough. The evidence presented today raises serious questions about the integrity of this association and its leadership, he declared. The room erupted in murmurs, and Karen's face turned pale. Outside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Neighbors gathered in small groups discussing the day's events. For the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope, but the fight wasn't over yet. Karen's lawyer filed for a continuance, buying her more time to regroup. I knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. That night, I found my driveway blocked by a pile of construction debris. A crude sign was posted on top. Consider this a warning. It was clear Karen was resorting to desperate measures. I called the sheriff, who promised to increase patrols around the property, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. The next morning, I woke to the sound of heavy machinery. Rushing outside, I saw a bulldozer parked at the edge of my property. Karen stood nearby, flanked by her contractor and a group of workers. "We're clearing the encroachment," she announced smugly. "You had your chance to comply." Furious, I stood in front of the bulldozer, refusing to move. "You have no authority to do this," I shouted. "This is private property." Karen smirked. "Not for long." The sheriff arrived minutes later, his lights flashing. He stepped out of his vehicle, his expression stern. "This stops now," he said, addressing Karen and her crew. "You're trespassing, and any further action will result in arrest." Karen tried to argue, but the sheriff silenced her with a raised hand. "We've uncovered enough evidence to warrant a full investigation into your activities. I suggest you cooperate." Karen reluctantly ordered her crew to stand down, but the damage was done. My property was littered with debris, and the emotional toll of the confrontation weighed heavily on me. Yet as the workers packed up and drove away, a small crowd of neighbors gathered, offering words of support. It was a reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. The battle wasn't over, but the tide was finally turning. Karen's power was waning, her allies abandoning her as the investigation deepened. The next court hearing would be critical, and I knew I had to be ready for whatever she threw at me. For now, though, I allowed myself a moment to breathe. Standing on the porch of the cabin my father had loved so much, determined to see this fight through to the end. The days following the bulldozer incident were tense. Karen had retreated, but her absence didn't mean peace. Anonymous notes continued to appear, warning me to drop the case, and a neighbor reported seeing strangers loitering near my cabin late at night. The sheriff increased patrols, but I knew Karen wasn't done. She was planning something, and I needed to be ready. Tom and I doubled down on our efforts. We dug through every document, every email, every shred of evidence we could find. The sheriff's investigation began producing results. Karen's contractor ally was charged with multiple counts of fraud, and audits revealed that the homeowner association's funds had been misappropriated for years. The community, once hesitant, was now firmly on my side. A pivotal breakthrough came when Tom discovered an email chain between Karen and a city official. The messages detailed plans to rezone the area around the lake for commercial development, a plan that hinged on Karen gaining control of my property. It was the smoking gun we needed, and the sheriff promised to bring it to the judge at the next hearing. On the eve of the hearing, chaos erupted. A fire broke out in one of the sheds on my property. The flames lit up the night sky, and neighbors rushed over to help douse the blaze. The damage was contained, but the message was clear. Karen was desperate. The sheriff's investigation tied the incident to one of Karen's associates, who had been seen driving away from the scene. Charges were filed, but Karen denied any involvement. Despite the setback, the fire only strengthened my resolve. The community rallied around me, offering support and resources to repair the damage. For the first time, I felt like the tide was truly turning in my favor. The courtroom was packed for the next hearing. The atmosphere was electric, with neighbors filling the benches, eager to see Karen finally held accountable. The judge began by addressing the fire, calling it a deplorable act, and warning Karen's team against further intimidation tactics. Karen sat stiffly, her composure cracking under the weight of the evidence piling against her. The sheriff presented the email chain, detailing the rezoning plans and Karen's collusion with city officials. He also introduced testimony from the contractor who had turned on Karen to save himself. The contractor admitted to falsifying documents at her behest, including the signed statement that claimed my father had agreed to cede the property. When my turn came, I described the harassment, the vandalism, and the fire. I pointed to the community members in the room, many of whom had suffered under Karen's rule. This isn't just about my cabin, I said. It's about a pattern of abuse and corruption that's affected all of us. The judge listened intently, his expression unreadable. Karen's lawyer tried to counter, but their arguments were flimsy. The evidence against Karen was overwhelming, and the community's testimonies painted a damning picture of her actions. After hours of deliberation, the judge delivered his ruling. Karen was found guilty of fraud, harassment, and misuse of homeowner association funds. She was ordered to resign immediately, pay restitution to the association, and face additional criminal charges. The crowd erupted into applause, and Karen stormed out of the courtroom, her empire in ruins. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of relief. The cabin was safe, and justice had been served. But the fight had taken its toll. As I stood on the porch that evening, watching the sun set over the lake, I couldn't help but think of my dad. This place had meant everything to him, and now it was mine to protect. With Karen gone, the homeowner association underwent a complete overhaul. New leadership was elected, and reforms were put in place to prevent future abuse. The community began to heal, and neighbors who had once been divided came together to rebuild what Karen had tried to destroy. Tom and I remained close, bonded by the battle we had fought together. The cabin, though scarred by the conflict, stood as a testament to resilience and determination. I knew there would always be challenges, but for now, the lake was peaceful, and the future felt brighter than it had in a long time. In the weeks following the courtroom victory, the lakefront community began to reclaim its sense of peace. Karen's departure was a turning point, but the damage she left behind, both physical and emotional, took time to repair. Her resignation from the homeowner association had sent shockwaves through the neighborhood, and her eventual arrest made it clear that her reign of terror was over. The new leadership of the homeowner association wasted no time enacting reforms. Meetings were now open and transparent, and fines or rules required community approval. For the first time in years, the association functioned as it was meant to serve the homeowners, not control them. I threw myself into repairing the cabin, determined to restore it to its former glory. Neighbors who had been distant or wary during the conflict now came forward to help. Tom, my stalwart ally, showed up with tools and supplies, and others followed suit. Together, we rebuilt the dock, repaired the damaged shed, and repainted the exterior. It felt like a tribute to my father's memory, a way to honor the legacy he had left behind. As Karen's trial approached, more details of her schemes were revealed. Her contractor ally confessed to sabotaging multiple properties under her orders, forcing owners to sell at reduced prices. The money from these deals had been funneled into her personal accounts and used to fund the rezoning project that would have turned the lakefront into a commercial development. Karen's former allies turned on her one by one, hoping to save themselves. By the time the trial began, the evidence against her was overwhelming. She was convicted on multiple charges, including fraud, harassment, and arson. Her sentence included significant jail time, fines, and restitution to the victims she had wronged. With Karen out of the picture, the community blossomed. Neighbors who had been too afraid to speak out before now found their voices. Block parties and neighborhood gatherings became common, fostering a sense of unity that had been missing for years. The lakefront's natural beauty, once overshadowed by conflict, became a source of pride once more. For me, the fight had been exhausting but worthwhile. The cabin stood as a symbol of resilience, a reminder that standing up for what's right can make a difference. I spent long evenings on the rebuilt dock, watching the sun dip below the horizon and feeling a deep sense of peace. The battles I'd fought had scarred me, but they had also made me stronger. One evening, Tom and I sat by the lake, beers in hand, watching the water ripple in the fading light. "You know," he said, "I don't think Karen ever thought she'd lose. People like her, they think they're untouchable." I nodded. "And they rely on everyone else being too scared to fight back. But once people see the truth, it's over for them." Tom raised his bottle in a toast. "To your dad. He'd be proud of how you stood your ground." I clinked my bottle against his. "To the cabin, and to never letting anyone take it from us again." As the stars reflected on the calm waters of Lake Sparrow, I felt a sense of closure. The battle for the cabin had been more than just a fight for property. It had been a fight for justice, for community, and for the memories tied to this place. The future felt bright, and I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them with the same determination that had brought me this far.